Hey guys, name's Paul. I'm a woodworker. I've been making sawdust for going on 40 years now, probably more than that. Around here I'm known as a finish guy. All my videos are on wood finishing, and I'm here to teach you how to get the perfect coat of polyurethane today. You know, 90% of the people who apply polyurethane do it wrong. Polyurethane isn't paint, and it can't be applied by paint, yet most of the people do. And the manufacturer, the print's way too fine. There's not enough room to explain how to do it properly. But we're going to show you how to do it properly so you get the previous coat. It requires a little bit of knowledge and somewhat of a new skill set, but by the time you're done with this video, you'll have it nailed. Okay, let me get set up and we'll get started. Okay, let's talk about the product itself. Let's talk about polyurethane. Polyurethane has, out of all the finishes on the market, polyurethane has a lot of different little intricacies. If you want to know all the intricacies about it, I suggest that you go to my video called About Polyurethane. Let's talk about the two forms of polyurethane, the water-based and the oil-based polyurethane. Water-based polyurethane is easier cleanup, and it dries clear. Oil-based polyurethane requires that you clean it either in mineral spirits or turpentine or paint thinner or one of the distillate products to get the oil out of the brush, but it outshines water-based urethane in durability, in expansion contraction. A wood seasonally expands and contracts. Water-based polyurethane has a tendency to crack over a few years, whereas oil-based polyurethane remains flexible. Oil-based polyurethane is a little slower to dry, which is actually a benefit, not a detriment. Water-based polyurethane becomes tacky within just a few minutes. The problem is that when you apply polyurethane, sometimes there'll be puddles, sometimes there might be little brush marks, sometimes there might be tiny bubbles. All of those things over time will clear up. The bubbles will pop, the brush marks will level, and the puddles will settle. So it's actually an advantage to have that little open setup time that oil provides. Water just happens too quick. Okay, let's talk about application. To get a nice finish, you're gonna need a good tool. To any project, an artist needs a good brush to develop nice work. Woodworker needs good tools. So the same thing with finishing. In finishing, our main tool is a brush. This is a foam brush. This is terrible. This is on the bottom end of the scale. It's right up there with rollers. You know, if you roll paint on a wall, it's all bumpy. If you want your finish all bumpy, then you can use something like this, or you can use a roller. The next up in the line is called chip brushes, and chip brushes they're fiber brushes, but they're stiff. They're not flexible. They're thin. They don't hold a lot of material, so they'll drip, they'll run, they'll puddle, they'll create havoc. Stay away from them. Okay, let's go into the medium range. Medium range would be a brush like this. This is a brush that would be around $18 to, I would say, $25. It's thicker. You can see. There's a lot of bristles. The bristles are softer than the China hair or than the chip brush, and it'll hold a lot of product. It'll release it slowly. Sometimes it'll leave some hairs behind. Not a big deal, but if you take good care of this brush, it's a good brush. This happens to be a natural fiber brush, which we would use for oils. Oils require natural hair brushes, not synthetic brushes. Synthetic brushes and oil don't work. Synthetic brushes are made, nylon brushes or polyester brushes are made for water-based products. And this is the sister, one's brother and sister, one's natural fiber and one's synthetic fiber. And synthetic fiber is for water, and natural fiber is for oil. All right, let's go up now. Let's talk about, if you're doing a lot of finishing, you want to have a good arsenal of good tools. So I recommend a good solid finish brush. This is a $40 to $60 brush. You can see how thick that is compared to that. You can see how thick, way thicker it is than that. It's soft. It feels almost like fur on a coat. It's made from ox hair. and it'll hold a lot of material. It won't drip or run. It'll release the material slowly and evenly, which is really what we want. This happens to be a natural bristle brush. So this is for oil finishes. This is the same brush, basically, but it's a synthetic brush. So it's a polyester brush. I think it's nylon. It doesn't say. It doesn't, but it's a polyester brush. So this would be for water products. Okay, so you need a good brush. So you need to decide. You know, for most of us, we're going to use an average type brush, and it'll do an okay job. Oh, by the way, one more thing. You see the difference in the profile of these brushes? This is a finish brush. This is a paint brush. This is what they call a sash brush. So this one is made for laying down evenly. This one, you have to work kind of on an angle to lay it down. It'll work, but it's chiseled a little different. The profile on the sides are a little different. They do have these in finish brushes, so that they have a flat head rather than a tapered head. Okay, let's go on to the next step. Okay, let's start off real quick with some of the things you'll need. I'll try to go through this real quick. You're gonna need some rubber gloves to protect your hands. You'll need a brush, obviously. You should have a yogurt container or some kind of container. You'll obviously need your urethane. You should have a container so we don't use it out of the can. We need to mix it, and so you should have a container. I like airtight containers, food containers that have a sealable lid on it. They're great because what we don't use today, we'll use tomorrow. You're going to need something to thin the polyurethane with. Mineral spirits is of choice. Be a little careful. What they've done to mineral spirits now is they've made an odorless mineral spirits, and it's almost a milky white thing. It's not a good product. If you can get regular mineral spirits, get it. If you can't, go to paint thinner, or you could use turpentine. If you're green, you can use Napa, you can use acetone. You know, there's some citrus solvents. I personally don't recommend them. You're gonna need sandpaper. I recommend that you go to a 180 grit. That's where we're gonna stop sanding to apply our polyurethane. It's a relatively fine sandpaper. Okay, we're gonna mix up a batch. Here's the deal. Polyurethane out of the can is just too thick. It's almost syrupy, so it doesn't apply very nicely. So what we want to do is we want to thin it so we can get a nice even coat. The key with polyurethane, there's an old rule I was taught by many years ago by an old timer, and he said the key to any finish is to lay it down thin. Lay it down thin. So you want thin coats and you want thin product. So we're going to thin the polyurethane, all right? Here we go. So we're going to mix it. So I'm mixing this, and notice I'm mixing it very slowly. I'm not going to shake the can. I'm not going to mix this violently. What I don't want to do is I don't want to put bubbles into the polyurethane. In the meantime, while I'm doing this, I've got my brush. I took a little plastic cup and I filled it with paint thinner. In this case, I'm using paint thinner, not mineral spirits. But I filled it with paint thinner, and I stuck the brush in you know, I wanted to cover the bristles, not quite up to the ferrule, not quite up to the metal part of the brush. Because what I want to do is I want to soften those bristles. So while I'm stirring this, it doesn't have to soak for a long time. But while I'm stirring this, I'm letting those bristles soak, and so they'll be softer when we're done. And what we're going to do is, whether it's oil-based or water-based, it doesn't matter. We still want it thinned. And what we're going to do is we're going to put in 3 parts of polyurethane and 1 part additional carrier. So in this case, it's oil, so it'll be mineral spirits. In the case of water, it would be water. By the way, if you're on a well, I recommend you use distilled water. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3. All right, so 3 parts polyurethane to 1 part mineral spirits, turpentine, water. Again, when I say water, be careful. I mean water for water-based polyurethane. Never put water in oil-based polyurethane. Oil and water don't mix. And all coats. So we're going to use whatever's left over. I'll seal up, and tomorrow I'll come back, and then I'll use this tomorrow. My brush has been soaking in paint thinner. I'm going to save this for cleaning, because when I'm done with this, I'll need to clean. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a paper towel and I'm going to dab the brush on. And I'm going to try to get as much of the mineral spirits out of the brush. Now, it's not going to hurt the product. Again, if you're using a water-based product, you'd be soaking this in water, not in mineral spirits or turpentine. But either one of those isn't going to hurt, like because it's a thinner, not going to hurt to have a little extra in the brush, and it's actually going to help, because what it does is now the fibers, the bristles on the brush have been softened, so it'll perform a little better. Okay, I'm going to take a piece of paper towel. I'm going to put it on the side, and I'll show you how I use that in just a second. Old rags, old oil or turpentine or chemical soap rags need to go outside in the garbage right away, because they can combust. I've had a friend who lost a wood shop, a commercial wood shop, because a new employee didn't dispose of the rags properly, threw them in the corner when they were done, and the shop burned overnight. So the next morning there was a big fire. All right, so here we go. Now all right, so I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to dip it maybe 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch in. I'm going to take it out and I'm going to let it drip. I'm not going to run the brush along the side of the can, along the side of anything. I'm not going to try to squeeze it out, because what will happen is if you do that, you'll end up putting air in the brush, and we don't want to do that. Okay, now just as a precaution, because you can dab it just a little bit on the paper towel just to get rid of any excess. I'm going to go to the center of the project and I'm going to lay the brush down, and watch it. I'm just going to put my thumb on so I can pull it, and I'm going to pull it across. I'm not putting any weight or any pressure on the surface. I'm just dragging the brush across. And at the end, we go very lightly off the end. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go about 2 inches off where I started from, and I'm going to lay the brush down again. That way, if there's any thickness of the material there, I'm going to thin it out and drag it the other way. I'm using the other side of the brush as well. No pressure on that brush. All I did was apply it, just set it down and drag it across. Dip it, let it drip out. Touch it if you feel necessary. We don't want too much. Set it down. Pull it across. Slow. Look how slow I'm moving. This isn't paint. We're not using rapid back and forth stroke motions. We're just setting it down and dragging it across. And all I want to see is a wet surface. Okay? So again, same procedure. Set it down. Dip if you feel you need to. I'm going to overlap about 1/2 inch over the last coat that I did. And then I'm going to drag it again. I'm dragging to the right. You may drag to the left, doesn't matter. And then I'm going to lay it a couple inches over, overlap, and drag it again. All right, so this was a 4-foot run. A brush like this could handle an 8-foot run easily. It could handle probably a 10-foot run. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that any excess is out of my brush. I'm working with a dry brush, and I'm going to go at one end, and this is what I call feathering. And I'm just going to drag it across the whole 3 rows that I've done so far. Now, these are very thin coats, but we're going to put on multiple coats. So thickness is built up in layers by applying multiple thin coats. So I often get the comment about, yeah, sure, it's easy to brush on a polyurethane on a flat surface. But what if you have a project like this, or you're working on ballast on a railing, or the legs on the table behind us? How do you do a brush on all these round and spindly surfaces? Well, you use the same product you're using. You thin it a little differently, and then you wipe it on. And I have a video it's called How and When to Wipe on Polyurethane. Check it out. I would definitely use a brush on the chair seat, and then on the spindles and the legs, etc. I would switch to a wipe on polyurethane. Really simple, real easy to use, and again, bubble free, run free, drip free. Check it out. Tiny little bubbles in there. I'm not worried about them. Those bubbles will pop. So I want the whole surface wet. Now, there's just a little 1/2 inch, so I'm not even going to dip. I'm just going to come straight across. Okay? And I'm going to start my feather from the 4th row. The edges are real simple. We just take a dry brush, and again, you want it dry. Let it dry. Don't play with it. The worst thing you can do now is, oh, I see something. Oh, I see something. And then you start fooling with it. What happens is when this gets tacky and you start brushing it, that's when you get flaws in it. So we don't want to fool with it. We've done what we're supposed to do. We've laid it down thin. Tomorrow we'll come back and we'll take a look at what we've done here. Oh, people always ask me, what do you do with your brush in between? Put it in a plastic bag, wrap it in foil, put it in the refrigerator? No, clean it. A brush is a tool. Remember what we said. The basic principles of the brush, of a good brush, are it holds a lot of material, it releases it slowly, it releases it evenly. It doesn't leave brush marks, it doesn't create puddles, and it doesn't create bubbles. So we want to keep this a good brush, and in order to keep it a good brush, we need to clean it. So right to the mineral spirits. I have a video on it, by the way. Take a look at it. Follow the light on this one. This project seemed to be producing a lot of bubbles, so I wanted to record it for you guys. The key here is just to leave them alone. The tendency is you'd want to try to brush these out. The problem is that as this product starts to set up, it becomes tacky, and the tackiness in the urethane will actually hold on to the bubbles rather than releasing them. So the key is, again, leave it alone. I'll show you in a couple hours. I went out and I re-videoed the section, and you can see there's no bubbles. Okay, so second coat, I would definitely, in between each coat of polyurethane, you're going to sand. And you want to do a very light sanding with a 220 grit sandpaper. Now, the one thing you won't do, because there are some, I can feel it, while there's no bubbles, there's some dust nibs, and I want to scratch the surface a little bit so the next coat grabs onto it. The problem comes in is what we've done is, this is a thin coat of polyurethane, and the stain underneath was put onto a pre-stained conditioner. So that means the stain really didn't soak real deep into the wood. So there's a chance if you use a 220 sandpaper that you're going to pull out some of the stain. So what you want to do is take the material from a brown paper bag, put it on a block of wood, and use that in place of sandpaper. It's coarse enough so that so that it'll remove those little dust nibs that have settled onto the wood, and it's fine enough so that it won't pull up any of the stain. So I'm going to do a very light sanding. It's going to be very quick. By the way, you want to, on the last coat, you don't want to sand, because what you'll do is you'll change the sheen of your finish if you sand it. So this is what you use instead. You use material from a brown paper bag again. Okay. All right. So just a very light going over. This doesn't take a lot. That's it. And that removed all the dust nibs. We've kind of loosened up some dust nibs, so we're going to take that tack cloth and we're just going to wipe down to make sure that there's no... And by the way, when you use tack cloth, you use it very, very lightly. Tack cloth has some kind of sticky substance on it, some kind of chemical. What you don't want to do is rub it into the wood. And guys, there's tiny bubbles, I can see them. But because this is not a fast drying polyurethane, and because it's thin, it's not so thick that it's going to try to hold on to those bubbles. It's going to let the bubbles pop. Okay, I'm all done. I'm going to soak my brush, I'm going to clean my brush, and I'll wait for tomorrow to put on the third and the final coat in this case. You can go, depending on your usage, one coat is never enough, 2 coats is for minimal use, 3 coats is for average use, 4 coats for heavy use. Like if you're doing a kitchen table and you got a bunch of teenage kids and they're going to be sitting at the table, you want 4 coats. You want it reasonably, really reasonably heavy. And again, keep in mind, it's not applying it heavy that makes it heavy. It's applying it thin and applying multiple layers. So you're actually building up the thickness with multiple layers. So that's it. On the third coat, between the second and the third coat, I did sand. I used a 220 grit sandpaper, but the third coat goes down exactly the same as all the other coats. We use the same principles, the same technique. Remember, don't sand this last coat, because what will happen is you'll change the sheen. This happens to be a satin sheen, but if you sand it, it'll get really dull and kind of milky white, so you don't want to sand it. What I did again is I used the material from a brown paper bag to do the final sand. That's it. Listen, do me a favor, subscribe. Let me hear from you. Like the video. You know, I'm building my channel, and all the information and all the feedback from you is a very positive thing. So thanks for watching. Happy woodworking. Best to you. Thanks.